We're holding on page 282. So this is, we're at the conclusion. We're holding towards the end of the letter. Again, the letter is based on the objections of the Misnagdim to the Tzavos Harivash. Because the Baal Shem Tov wrote that when there is a that the Shechina is in everything, and if there's a goy who's disturbing your davening, trying to disturb your davening, you have to realize that the Shechina is within the goy. And the speaking of the goy is Pasha the Shechina that's speaking. You have to realize the incredible Golus HaShechina that's over there, and therefore and use that as your kavanah to daven with even more kavanah. Now, again, the Misnagdim objected to this. What do you mean? The Shechina is in a goy. A goy is trying to disturb davening, and the Alter Rebbe says, yeah, that's what it says in Kisvei Arizal. That's the idea of Golus HaShechina. What is Golus HaShechina? That the Shechina is captive in the klippos. And what does that mean? That means the Shechina is being forced to do something which is disgraceful to it, which is disgusting, repulsive. But then at the end of the day, it's the Shechina. It is the Shechina that's doing it. It's the Eibishter, at every single moment, it's Hashem and the Koyach of Hashem that's in it that's causing this to happen. Yes? No, you heard?
No, he's a mitnageh too.
What does two mean? Besides for you? You said it.
No, he doesn't like the idea that a goy, Hashem put the klippa by him, and because of that, you're davening better.
So the Alter Rebbe brought many different rayas. He brought a raya from Kisvei Arizal, primarily what it's written in Sefer HaGulam on the pasuk Asher Shalta Adam Ba'Adam. And now the Alter Rebbe is going to continue. We're going to start where it says V'gam, and the first word in the line is Pshutei, page 282. The first word in the line is Pshutei. It's around 9 lines in the bottom of the page.
Where, the bottom of the page?
9 lines in the bottom. The first word in the line is Pshutei,
2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
where it says V'gam.
The
Rebbe says, up until now, Alter Rebbe was saying that all I'm doing is telling you what the Arizal says as it's explained by the Baal Shem Tov and the Mazit Shemagid. And then Alter Rebbe says, V'gam, moreover, Hi Emunah Pshuta, let's forget the Kabbalah for a second. What I'm saying really is part of what the Emunah Pshuta Bistam Klolus Yisrael. This is the simple belief that all Yidden have. U'mesura biyadam ma'aviseya makdeshim. This is a emunah which is given to us from our holy ancestors. Shaholchu b'tmimus im Hashem. Our ancestors who went with Hashem with tmimus, with sincerity. You could even touch tmimus as naivete.
What?
Naivete. You know what that means? Being naive.
Naive.
To a certain extent, a Yid is naive. In other words,
Here you do.
er weiß nicht, in other words, doesn't know any kunsen. Also this is what I was told, and this is the MS. And don't, without the whole sophistication and the whole intellectualizing, right? Bitmimus. They went bitmimus from Hashem. They weren't busy investigating and analyzing with their human intellect. Inyan alakus, the concept of godliness. Asher ulamaylam mesechel in case the truth is godliness is above and beyond intellect. We can't really understand it. So they weren't trying to figure out. Okay, I'm sorry. I started in the wrong place. Let's move up a few lines. The last word in the line where it says Bishagam.
Go down or go up?
Bishagam. Last word in the line. Bishagam. Up. I started in the middle. Sorry, B'Shagam, moreover, She'inyan Zeh, this idea, Einei Mechachmas HaKabbalah. What I'm telling you, the Alter Rebbe says, this is not about Kabbalah. U'meh ha'nestaris la'Hashem Elokeinu. You know the pasuk says, ha'nestaris la'Hashem Elokeinu, that the hidden things are for Hashem, ha'nigleis lanu levanenu. So Kabbalah is ha'nestaris la'Hashem Elokeinu. Kabbalah is that way, the hidden stuff, which belongs to Hashem. The Alter Rebbe says, this is not from the Kabbalah, the ha'nestaris, ki'im, rather, ma'hanigleis lanu levanenu. This concept essentially is something which is revealed to us and to our children. Laha min emunah shlema, to believe with a perfect belief. B'mikra malei shadibar akasav. It's a very plain, clear, explicit pasuk. What does the pasuk says? Haloyes hashamayim v'sa'aretz ani malei nu'um Hashem. Hashem says that I pervade everything. I fill everything, the heavens and the earth. She'ein mikra yitzim de pshutei. This is, we know that there's no pshetlach in the pasuk. Hashem is everywhere, in the heavens, meaning in the highest level, and also in the earth in the lowest level. He's everywhere. There's no place, Ani Mali, which is devoid of Hashem. So the guy who was speaking, yes, Hashem is in him also. Vegaman also, here's where we started. Vegaman also, Yamuna Pshuta, this concept that Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is everywhere, right?
A nice song.
Right? Vegam. Amuna pshuta b'stam kol Yisrael. This is what all Yidden believe. With amuna pshuta, with a simple belief. U'metzura b'yadam aviseim ha'kedoshim. Again, this is something which has been handed to us. This is a tradition we have from our holy ancestors. Shaholchu b'tmim m'sayim Hashem. Our ancestors who had amuna pshuta. They didn't know chachmas. They know Hashem is everywhere. B'li lachker b'seichel anushi. They didn't investigate with the human intellect. In the concept of godliness. Asher hulamayla ma'seichel adin kates. Which the truth is that Elokus, godliness is infinitely above and beyond human intellect. Leida, so they didn't know, they didn't investigate. Eichum malik alaretz. How is it? How does it? Rak only shechadash mekarev bo. This is something which is a new thing, a new phenomenon. So the chadash mekarev bo is a pasuk in Hazinu, and it's not said in a complimentary way. New people coming with new ideas. And what do they want? Lachker b'chkirazu. Suddenly they have to understand everything. It has to make sense. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, provided that it's based on the emunah pshuta. In other words, when you have emunah, then to be choiker, to go and to investigate is a good thing. But the investigation is not, is it true or is it not true? The investigation is to try to understand better that which is already upkalek, that which we already take for granted because we have this emunah. Right, to understand this properly, the Alter Rebbe says, it's impossible to bring it closer to their intellect. We need to first preface ideas taken from the writings of the Arizal. And we need to strip them from their physical terminology, as we spoke about this. Last time, and as I've heard from my teachers, the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, the Rebbe says these explanations, these aren't explanations that I thought of on my own. These are explanations that I heard from my teachers. But what's interesting to know is the Rebbe doesn't say, and with this they'll be able to understand it. He says that's the only way. L'karev el hasechel. How do you translate l'karev el hasechel?
To bring it into what do you call it?
To make you understand.
No, that's not l'karev el hasechel. L'karev means to bring it close.
Okay, so
Implication being.
Bring close to your mind, to your.
And the implication, and what is the implication?
Your
Even
understanding.
you don't understand.
Is that fully understanding you'll never have. In other words, us as human beings, to say that we'll understand it, we can be mekarev el hasechel. We can bring it a little closer to our understanding. You know, Sheldon, you shouldn't feel left out when you say you don't understand it fully well. Alter Rebbe is saying, I don't mean you, I mean everyone over here, right? Alter Rebbe is saying,
He's making fun of me again. See that?
and yet you keep on coming back.
You really like it.
No, I'm not. I don't mean you. I mean all of us. I'm saying Alter Rebbe is saying that the best we can try in this area is l'karev el hasechel. That's the best we can do. Best we can do is that it shouldn't be something which is very, very distant, a little closer. But to say I fully understand this concept, who are we to fully understand anything in these areas? I mean, this, as he said, that this is infinitely removed from seichel. However, says, you know, these concepts you can't explain this well in a letter. Ki'im, rather, mipelo isn't shemas. The way to do it is mouth to a listening ear. The only way, in other words, to explain these deep concepts in Kabbalah, pen and paper is not a. You need a teacher. You need to hear from a teacher. Liyachidei school, and even then, it's not for everyone. You know, it's for special individuals who can really fully understand these concepts. The people who are the leftover people. In other words, not everyone. The remaining people who Hashem summons them, as the pasuk says, that those who seek out Hashem will be able to understand everything. From this, you can also infer the opposite, meaning that the only people who can understand are the people who the words of the Alter Rebbe, he says, Oizen Shema, so have a listening ear. And the people who are Mevakshe Hashem, the people who are actually searching for Hashem. The Alter Rebbe is telling the people to whom he's writing the letter, he's telling them a very important concept, which is, you can only hear an answer if you're interested in hearing an answer.
My question is not better if you have written down and saying it? Why is it cannot be Mechtav? Only to hear it from someone.
You're right, Itaka can be both, but he's saying, this is leading into what he's going to say next. So hold your thought for a second. This is a big rule. And I might have mentioned this in the past. In Sivan of Tafshinun, so this is around 23 years ago. So there was a Rosh Yeshiva from Israel came to the Rebbe.
30 years.
Sorry?
32 years.
Sorry?
32 years.
30, I said, what did I say? 20? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rosh Yeshiva came to the Rebbe. The Rosh Yeshiva. And he said that the Bnei Torah of Bnei Brak, they have a question, and they want to know why it is that Lubavitch doesn't sleep in the sukkah. So maybe the Rebbe can give me the answer. I can go back and give it to the Bnei Torah and Bnei Brak. I've spoken about this before.
No.
No. For those of you who went by dollars, you know the average person by dollars was for how long? Was 1 second, and if you had a request, so was 15 seconds. And if you're a Hasheva person and you got 2 minutes, that was something which was something that was huge. The Rebbe engaged him in conversation for probably 25 minutes. And the Rebbe refused to answer the question. Refused to answer the question. And the Rebbe basically told him that these people are not interested in the answer. These people are, as the Rebbe termed them, they are mechachariv, which means they're looking to make machlekes. And therefore, the Rebbe said you shouldn't have anything to do with them. Stay away from them. You're not going to accomplish anything. Now, just a little background. There's a whole sikha from the Rebbe. The Rebbe gave a whole talk, and it's printed, where the Rebbe explains, according to Nigla and according to Chassidus, why Chabad doesn't sleep in the sukkah. The Rebbe could easily have given him the answer. The Rebbe didn't. The Rebbe chose not to. The Rebbe said, listen, I want you to understand something. He says, take a look at the biggest gedolim of the Litvishers in the last 100 years, 150 years. All of them were closest friends with the Chabad Rebbes. Chaim Volozhner, Rebbe Yitzchak Volozhner, the Netziv, Rebbe Chaim Oizer, Rebbe Chafetz Chaim, Rebbe Chaim Brisker, all of them, they were like this with Lubavitch Rebbes. And they knew that Lubavitch doesn't sleep in the sukkah. And nevertheless, they were fine. What does it mean they were fine? Does that mean they understood why? Maybe they didn't understand why. Maybe they had a question. But everyone, you can always have a question. A question is a valid thing. The problem is when it's not a question. The problem is when you want to make a machlokes. And the question is your excuse for that. Your question is your justification for it. Then answering the question is silly because the person isn't interested in hearing an answer to the question. Even if you can give them the answer to the question, what's going to happen? First of all, they probably won't accept it. And if they do accept it, what's going to happen? Guess what? 2 minutes later, they're suddenly going to have another question. Why? Because it's not about the questions in the first place. It's about a desire to make machlokes. It was a long conversation. They was very passionate about this. And the idea in terms of understanding that sometimes we often make the mistake of thinking that when we get a question, we have to answer the question. And if we give a good enough answer, then mission accomplished, and we've solved the issue because obviously the person asked the question. I have an answer. But that's not the case at all. You know, they say a story about someone who comes to Rav, and this person had gone off the derech. And he tells the Rav, I want you to know that I have a bunch of questions on Yiddishkeit. And he starts listing. And he says his first few questions, and he tells the Rav, no, you have any answers? The Rav says, no. He says, what do you mean you have no answers? He says, yeah. He says, why? He says, I answer questions. I can't answer answers. These questions are your answer. They're your answer why you left Yiddishkeit. I can't answer an answer. If the question was really a question, if that was really if it was a question, I could answer them. But these are answers. They're not questions. You can't answer an answer. And a lot of times when someone's coming with a question, it's not really a question. It's an answer. You know, it's true in so many different areas. I'm talking about people who go off the derech. A lot of times they have questions. You have to realize questions aren't questions. It's not. We don't deal. You're wasting time when you have to find out what's really the issue, what's really the problem. It's never the questions. It's never the question. I'll never say over here also. If there are people over here, the words Alter Rebbe says, Eizin Shemas, if there are people taka, they have a listening ear. Okay, listening means that they taka want to hear. And they're Mevakshe Hashem, then I'm telling you, I can speak to them, I can explain everything to them. But Mekal Hein at the Shemei Alav, Alter Rebbe says, from the yes, I can also understand the no. Meaning, if they just have questions, and the purpose of the question is, as it says, they're looking to complain, they're looking to ask, because they don't like Chassidus, to them, I can't help them, because the best answers aren't going to help these people. Sorry? There's two in Yanam over here. He's saying, first of all, to be able to good verstehen the idea of a Lakus, you need Yechidus Kola, but then another Tanai is that it has to be people who are willing to listen. You know, it's
People who are receptive to what you're saying.
yeah, they're receptive. Because they're not receptive, then famous story it's said about one of the Vishnitzer Rebbes. I don't remember which one. But back in Europe, whichever city, whether it was Vishnitz or whichever other city he was living in, so every night he'd go for a walk, and his mishamish his gabbai would go along with him. And one night, the Rebbe is going a different way than usual, and he heads straight to the house of the manager of a bank. Heard this story?
I think so.
It's a great story. Manager of a bank who was not from the Fruma people in the city. He was a Yid, but he was a more member of the Haskalah, of the assimilated. And the Rebbe knocks on the door. Guy opens the door, sees the vision, said, Rebbe's there. No, even though he wasn't from, but this is the Rebbe is the Rebbe.
It's a distinguished person.
Invited him to the house. The Rebbe, would you like a seat? Yes, certainly. The Rebbe says down. And he's not saying anything. He's quiet. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. It's getting a little awkward.
Why you came here?
So he doesn't have the chutzpah to say why he comes here, but he beckons the gabbai, calls him over and says, you know, why did the Rebbe come here? He says, I have no idea. he didn't tell me anything. He just okay. Anyways, another 2-3 minutes pass by, and the Rebbe stands up and says, thank you so very much. Have a good night. The guy leads him to the door, the banker, and then he It's covered to the Rebbe. He actually walks the Rebbe all the way back to his house, to the Rebbe's house, and right before the Rebbe was about to go into his house, he says, Rebbe, when you're in my house, I wouldn't, I didn't have the chutzpah to ask you because I'm your host, I'm not going to bother you, but now, why did you come to me? I says, oh, I came to you because there's a certain mitzvah I needed to do. He says, what was the mitzvah? He says, oh yeah, the mitzvah is, it says that kashem shemitzvah, just like it's a mitzvah to say something which will be heard, it's a mitzvah not to say something which won't be heard. So I came to your house to do that mitzvah. He says, Rebbe, what didn't you tell me? He says, I can't tell you. He says, please. He says, how do you know I'm not going to listen to you? I said, I know. Trust me, I know you're not going to listen to me. I just did the mitzvah. I really appreciate the hospitality. Thank you very much. Anyways, the guy obviously, he knew just there. Like, if you insist, I'll tell you. There's a woman in town who's an almana, a recent almana, and your bank holds the mortgage to her house, and she missed a bunch of payments, and now your bank is about to foreclose on her. Will you be able to help her? I says, Rebbe, I don't own the bank. I manage the bank. It's not my money. What can I do? I can't do anything about it. Rebbe says, exactly. That's what I said. Anyways, the guy went home that night, and it bothered him so much that he came up with a plan. He found a way to resolve it, to make the money, but the bank did not foreclose on the house of this woman. Sorry?
I think he paid it himself.
Out of his own pocket, possibly. Anyways, but the message of the story, we know that a lot of times we think it's a mitzvah to speak. In so many different areas in life, it's a mitzvah to speak. You know, they say something, you see something, say something. You see something, say something. You hear something, say something. And one of the messages Alter Rebbe is saying is, Lav Dafka, you know, if the person is willing to listen, and truly interested, then speaking is beneficial. But otherwise, you're still wasting your words. You're still. What's the point? What's the good?
But how do you know if the person will listen or not?
It takes
You have
wisdom.
to try.
You have to try, but whenever you're in a certain situation, the derech klal, you can make an assessment. Now, sometimes you can make a mistake. Not always you'll be right. Sometimes you'll think that they can listen, and it turns out they can't. And sometimes you may maybe misassess. But upon him, the first thing that you do in any given situation is you have to make an honest assessment. Is there taka chance? Otherwise, Chazal tell us, just like it's a mitzvah to speak, say something, it's a mitzvah to be quiet. And that's in many areas. And the same thing is when someone asks a question. That the door locked. Someone knocking on the door.
Yeah, maybe the door is locked.
No,
You can open it. Yeah.
What's the matter?
I once actually
Don't open the door. The freezer out.
sorry,
What, he's gonna open the door now?
maybe someone wants to learn Torah. No,
I
there's
thought
someone
you
knocking.
wanted to vent.
Somebody was knocking.
No, okay.
Oh, I mean, unlock. I thought you wanted to ventilate.
There's someone knocking.
No,
No.
No,
the black door's open
Anyways,
because it's very cold.
there was a professor whose name was Velvel Green. All of us all. He passed away a few years ago. He lived in Minnesota, and he wasn't didn't grow up from.
House.
Velvel?
Sorry,
Velvel? His name was Velvel?
No,
and he
he was-
wasn't a frum guy?
I think he changed. No, he reverted once. He became Prum eventually. Then he changed into Velvel. What was his name originally? I'm
No,
not sure.
no, originally.
Originally was Velvel Taka?
Yeah, that's how your Rabbi
I have his
found him.
book.
You have his book.
It's safer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
His parents were Zionists and they wanted to have the Yiddish name.
Okay.
Bundist or something.
okay, but he was
Zionist would not give a Yiddish
he
name.
he grew up conservative. He was attended the conservative temple, and then we're talking about here in the early '60s. The early '60s, Rabbi Moshe Feller, Zolzan Gesund, he was sent as a shliach to Minnesota. He's still there till today. And this is actually interesting, a story that the Rebbe said. The Rebbe himself repeated the story by Fabregan years later, not the names, but that he was one of the more important members. He was a big scientist, and
With NASA.
eventually he worked for NASA. Yes, and he was one of the important, prominent members of the community. So Rabbi Feller wanted to meet him. So after a while, finally, Rabbi Feller secures an appointment with him. He comes to him. They have a meeting at the office, and they're having a conversation. And suddenly, for a minute, he went to this Professor Green. He went to get something, a book or something. He turns around and he sees the rabbi. He has a string around his waist, and he's facing the wall, and he's busy shuffling. And this is going on for a while, 10, 15 minutes. Like, whatever. We're middle of a meeting. He writes about this in an article afterwards. He says, I had no idea that Jews prayed during the weekdays. I had no idea that Jews pray outside of a synagogue. Like, this is talking about he had no clue what's going on. And but he was respectful. And after he said, what happened? Yeah, I realized the sun is setting and time to daven mincha. And what's interesting is that their chapter, that impressed him more than anything else with the conversation. That there was no time to daven. And yes, I waited for a few months to get this meeting, and it's an important person, but there's more important things to do than. Anyways, at an early point in his relationship, so somehow or other he happened to find out that the Rebbe the Rebbe claimed that the world was against evolution, and that the world was actually 5,700 and sorry,
Well,
and however many years old.
the 1960s,
Yeah.
20s.
He's a big scientist. So he went to Rabbi Feller and says, what's this foolishness all about? He says, okay, I don't know if he didn't find out. He found out that, that's the Jewish opinion is that the world's 5,700 whatever years old and it doesn't believe in evolution. He told Rabbi Feller, okay, what's this, this is ridiculous. Feller said, listen, what do you want from me? What do I understand these things? But you know what, there happens to be, there's a letter that the Rebbe wrote on the topic. So let me show you, he went and gave him a letter that the Rebbe wrote on this topic. You know, the Rebbe wrote many of these, issues of science versus Torah, Kaviyachol. Where the Rebbe understood that there is no verses. It's always it's a misunderstanding of science if you think that science contradicts Torah. He gave it to him. So Professor Green, read the letter, and he comes back to Rabbi Feller and says, "This doesn't make sense. I have a lot of issues with what the Rebbe wrote." So Rabbi Feller says to him again. He says, "I'm sorry, I can't answer you. Why don't you just write a letter to the Rebbe?" So he did that. He wrote a letter to the Rebbe, a lengthy letter. When he wrote, I got this letter which you wrote, and I have all these issues, and he enumerated all those issues, and basically told the Rebbe, you're a good rabbi, stick to being a rabbi, leave the science to the scientists, and he did not get an answer from the Rebbe. The Rebbe did not respond. And he at this time he was already beginning to correspond with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe was corresponding, but this letter the Rebbe ignored. The Rebbe did not respond to this letter. Around 2 years later, he wrote a letter to the Rebbe, and in the letter he wrote to the Rebbe that he started sending his children either to a Fruma camp or a Fruma school. I don't remember which one it was. And he gets back a letter from the Rebbe says, "Thank you so much for the amazing news. P.S. In response to the letter that you wrote to me about this and this, so here is your answers." The Rebbe, point by point, this letter, by the way, that you mentioned, David, you mentioned that you have this book. That letter is printed in this book. Point by point, the Rebbe goes and responds to every single thing every single one of his issues that he had. 2 years. And he says, the Rebbe knew that at the time I wasn't ready to hear the answer. Because I didn't have, in the words of the Rebbe over here, I didn't have Oizen Shemas. I didn't have the ears.
He wasn't receptive.
Sorry, what?
He wasn't receptive.
He wasn't receptive. And therefore the Rebbe was like, let him think that I'm wrong. What's the big deal? Let him think that I'm wrong.
The right moment he will get
As long as he's learning a little more Torah, doing more mitzvahs, that's all that counts. And maybe the day will come and when the Rebbe felt that he was receptive, the Rebbe responded to him. It's it's not about answering your question. And actually with this same guy, there was another story. He says, this is an article that's printed on Chabad.org. You can look it up, by the way, if you look up his article, Velvel Green. He says, he writes, I think this is in 1963 or 1962, he was invited to be part of a scientific delegation to Poland. Now during this time, Poland was part of the Soviet bloc, right? And he went with his wife. He went to Warsaw. He writes about how he visited the Warsaw ghetto, which at that time, anyone here was in Poland? No. But today today's very much the style to people go. What?
Who would want to go there?
A lot of people go.
Blood-soaked.
A lot of people go there. But the bottom line is then, the entire Warsaw ghetto was rubble.
Give them money.
It was rubble. It was,
What year was this?
in the early 60s. It was still rubble. The
Still
Warsaw ghetto.
rubble? Yeah.
Still rubble. He writes about it there. He writes about a very emotional experience he had meeting a poor Jew in the ghetto. He comes home to his. They come back to the hotel room, and him and his wife are completely traumatized by the experience. And his wife turns to him and says, "Velvel, we're starting to keep kosher. We're starting to keep kosher." I guess that something touched her neshama over there. He was like, "You know what? It's a good idea. When we get back to Minnesota, we'll speak to Rabbi Feller, and we'll find out what that entails." Okay, he comes back to Minnesota, calls up his friend Rabbi Moshe Feller. So, "Oh, sure, no problem. I'll come. I'll take care of it." A few days later, he pulls into his house with a crew and with the big pots and with everything, and it's like he had no clue what he was in for. He didn't understand what kosher was. And the fellow starts going through the fridge. This, not this, not this, not this, not that. You have to realize also that the 1960s isn't the same as 2023 in terms of the availability of kosher.
Kosher food, yeah.
What? Yeah. So, and then they start koshering the dishes. And after almost all the dishes were kosher, so Professor Green brings out, he says, a big box. He says, here is our expensive heirloom china. This is something which is very precious to us. Please be very careful with it when you kosher it.
They broke it.
And Rabbi Feller is like, you can't kosher
You
china.
can't kasher China.
So Rabbi Feller, who's a wise person, he tells him, you know, China, it's not so simple, not such a simple thing. I'm not sure exactly how it's koshered. Why don't you put it aside? And next time I go to New York, I'll talk to a rabbi about this. We'll figure it out. So the next time Rabbi Feller goes to New York, comes back, and Professor Green tells him, no, he spoke to the rabbi. Feller says, you wouldn't believe it. I forgot. Next time. But meanwhile, don't use it. Meanwhile, just make sure that you put it. Now, I know it's going to be hard for you to believe this, but next time Rabbi Feller went to New York, he forgot again. And the next time, it's funny today, think about it. You pick up a phone, you send an email, but then, right? Next time you forgot again. And this went on for a few years. I remember, 2 years, 3 years. And also during this time, Mrs. Green was suffering from secondary infertility. Which means she had children, but there was a few years and she wanted to have children. What?
More children.
Yeah. It's called secondary infertility, when you have children, but then you can't have any more. And one day, Professor Green says he comes home. One day he comes home, and his wife tells him, we really want to have children. I decided that maybe I should start putting on a sheitel. And those dishes, I gave them away to a neighbor. And that was the end of that story. And yes, they had children.
I hope it wasn't a Jewish neighbor.
Sorry?
I hope it wasn't a Jewish neighbor.
But this is another example of the idea of, you have to know when the person's listening, and you have to use your words.
Correct.
With wisdom. It's not correctly. You can be 100% correct, but not wise. It's not about being correct. It's about being wise, knowing what the person's going to hear. Because if the person's not going to listen, then it's a waste of time. I once gave a seminar on this topic to a bunch of shluchim, and then afterwards, one of the shluchim reached out to me. He says, I was speaking on this topic of, so Shliach asked me. He says, there's a certain person who I go to, and every single person, not a frum person, every single time I go to him, we get into the argument. I forgot the certain topic. There's so many different issues that people have a secular mindset, and I don't know really what to answer. What to answer? So I said, next time the person brings it up, tell the person, you know what? This is an area where obviously we disagree. Why don't we agree to disagree? And why don't we talk about other topics where we do agree on? Why don't we just put on tefillin? Anyways, afterwards, the shliach reached out to me. He says he did it, and it worked incredibly. And that's it. The topic was laid to rest. That person wasn't willing to hear that thing, so leave it alone. Leave it alone. There are other things that we do agree on. Not every single thing a person. Anyways, okay. We went a little off his height, but that's an important topic. Okay, let's continue inside. The Rebbe finishes his letter and says, you have seen the explanation for one statement, Misfarim Hayeduim, from the books that are known, in other words, the books of Chassidus. L'dugma u'la'ois, this should be for you an example and a sign. Kigam kol hamamar matmuim, that also all the other statements that might seem to be surprising, yashlam bir pirush u'bir heitev l'yedichein. So for the people who understand Kabbalah, they can be understood well. However, lo yikavu ma losam elai. Again, this is addressed to the Misnagdim of Vilna. The Alter Rebbe says, please do not hope. Don't start sending me letters asking me to explain to you every single thing that seems a little off. That's a very great and a very difficult job. V'i efshar b'shum oifen, and it's not possible in any which way for me to do that. Rak, rather, im tirtzu, if you wish, shilchu lachem echod u'miyuchad shebe'edal. The Rebbe is saying, here's my offer. I want you to send to me, one of the top people of your community, u'panim al panim adaber by. I will speak to him face to face in Yirsa Hashem. V'Hashem yiyeh im pi b'hatifi. May Hashem's mouth be with my May Hashem be with my mouth when I speak. V'yiyu l'ratzin b'refi, and may my words be l'ratzin. So this is here. With this we finished a letter. We started it quite a while ago. We started a few weeks ago, and
Tifi? What is that?
Hatifi, yeah.
Tifi, what? That means when I speak to him?
It's a pasuk. It's in Tehillim. We have these words.
Oh, it's in Tehillim.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to know what it's like teitafis, right? It's which means to speak.
It said Latif Musar in
Yeah,
Hebrew.
yeah, yeah.
Latif Musar.
Yeah.
That's
Hatifi means that it's definitely a word in Tehillim.
Do you know what paragraph it is?
Not offhand.
They have in Hebrew Latif Musar, to give Musar, to say.
Concordancy.
Yeah, you'll find it there. Okay, so let's wrap up this Perek over here. Finish the Perek. We still have a few minutes left. So let's try to wrap up this Perek. This is not, if the Alter Rebbe over here, and this is the one letter in Tanya which is addressed to the Misnagdim, as mentioned, and where the Alter Rebbe is defending himself and Chassidus against the accusations or the tightness of the Misnagdim, it's not a random topic, because this is a topic which I think we mentioned this in previous classes. This is a topic which was a very core issue back in the day. As the idea of Tzimtzum Kipshutei, Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei, is Hashem everywhere, is Hashem not everywhere? And this is one of the big ideas of the Baal Shem Tov, Hashgacha Pratis. One of the big ideas Baal Shem Tov spoke about. Hashem is everywhere. Hashem is in everything, in every event, in every circumstance, in everything. Everything is managed by Hashem, controlled by Hashem, and therefore there's a lesson to be learned from everything. There's a purpose and there's a kavanah in everything also. And what this means in simple language is that it's easy to find and identify Hashem in positive and holy circumstances. But how about when we're confronted with a difficult situation? How about when we're confronted not only a difficult situation physically or materially, but even a spiritually difficult situation? We're confronted with a spiritual challenge. We're confronted with something which seems to be challenging Yiddishkeit and Torah and mitzvahs. Is there Hashem over there also? And the answer that Alter Rebbe gives over here in this Perek is absolutely yes. The Eibishter is there also. And if the Eibishter is there, there's a purpose. And then the question to me is, what is the purpose? What is the purpose? In what way is this meant to be mechazik, my avodas Hashem? In what way is this mentioned to bring about a greater yiskadal shmei rabba? And that's really what this Perek is all about. And it sounds like deep Kabbalah. Can we find the lakus in klippus or not? But in our lives, in a very relevant way, the question is, each one of us, we encounter on a regular basis, we encountered forces that seem to be going against Kedusha, against the Eibishter. We have to realize that also is the Shechina. It's Taka Shechinta Begavusa. We look around and we see this in so many different, whether it's in the public area, different forces that seem to be conspiring against Torah values and Kedusha.
Rasha v'Todlo. How come? That's exactly what.
No, it's not exactly that. We're not talking. We're talking about things that are conspiring to go against Kedusha. Nothing to do with V'Tovlei. Or in our own lives, sometimes we have these kind of forces, and we have to realize that ultimately it's all from Hashem, and therefore the kavana is to push me to a higher level in avodas Hashem, because ultimately, as we mentioned, is asher shalat ha'adam bi'adam l'raloi. That yes, over here it's a case of the klipa holding hostage kaviyachol the shechina, but it's l'raloi. It's ultimately the detriment of klipa because it's meant to bring about a greater avodas Hashem. Now. Mashgacha Pratis, with this we finish this Perek, but Mashgacha Pratis, we are Over here, this is the Thursday night, which is before a very big day on the Chabad calendar. This upcoming Wednesday is Yud Shvat, which is the Histalkus, Yom Histalkus, the yahrzeit of the Rebbe Rayatz, the
By the way,
Frierdiker
we're
Rebbe.
for bringing here,
Okay,
Wednesday night?
Tuesday night.
and it is the day when the Rebbe obviously automatically became the Rebbe because V'zarach Hashemesh U'ba Hashemesh. But also, 1 year later, on Yud Shvat, in the year Tafshin Yud Aleph, 1951, is when the Rebbe officially accepted the mantle of leadership. And this is something which I think we touch upon every single year, but it's also especially relevant, Bashkach Pratis, to the period that we're talking about, which is the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away on a Shabbos. Yud Shvat was a Shabbos that year, 1950. And because at that time the Frierdiker Rebbe was not saying Mamarim because of his speech impediment, he was impaired. His speech was impaired. So instead, he would write Mamarim. And then, in advance of every significant day on the calendar, whether it was a Yom Tiv, or whether it was a special day on his own personal calendar, the Chabad calendar, the Frierdiker Rebbe would give a mimer to be published and to be studied on the day, on that special day. So it came along Purim, he would give a mimer to be learned, and it was published beforehand, and it was meant to be, instead of the Rebbe saying a mimer on Purim, the Chassidim would learn that mimer on Purim. Yud Shvat was the yahrzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe's grandmother. His father's mother's name was Rivka, Rebbetzin Rivka, the wife of the Rebbe Maharash. She passed away in Yud Shvat in the year Tafresh Ayin Dalet, 1914. So in honor of the yahrzeit of his Baba, he gave out a mimer. Now this was a 4-part mimer, actually. The first part was for Yud Shvat, and each part was 5 chapters. There's a total of 20 chapters. The first part was 5 chapters. And then in the same kuntras also, there was another mimer, which was the second section. In other words, there's in a mimer it's called a hamshach, when you have a few mamorim, but it's like a serialized mimer. In other words, it comes in installments. The second mimer was for 3 days later, Yud Gimel Shvat, because Yud Gimel Shvat was the yahrzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe's mother. And then the next 2 parts, again, each one of them being 5 prakim, one was intended for Purim, was going to be printed for Purim, and one of them was going to be printed for Beis Nissen, which was the yahrzeit of the Frierdiker Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab. Anyways, that Shabbos, the Frierdiker Rebbe passes away. He passes away. So he wrote a mimer for his own day, and that mimer was called Basi Lagani. And then in the years that followed, every single year on Yud Shvat, the Rebbe would say a mimer Basi Lagani. That was part of there was a special mimer every single year. It was the Rebbe would make sure to mention all of the Rebbes and the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid in the mimer. He'd bring down a Torah from each one of them in the mimer. But every year, the Rebbe's mimer was based on 1 chapter. So in the first Tafshin Yud Aleph, the first year, the first mimer the Rebbe said was based on the first chapter of Basi Lagani. And the second, 1952, was on the second chapter. They all started with the words Basi Lagani. The Rebbe would quickly recap where we are, and then the Rebbe would focus, and the entire mimer was explaining and elaborating upon and bringing biurim from all the different Rebbeim on that 1 chapter. And this went on for 20 years. Because for 20 years, then until he finished. So in 1970, the Rebbe finished the first cycle of Basi Lagani. In 1971, the Rebbe started again from the beginning. And 1971, the mimer again was on chapter 1. 1972 again was on chapter 2, and so on and so forth. And the Rebbe wrote that it has become the minig b'Chassidei Chabad that every year we learn 1 perik. So this year, we are now in the 4th round, because it was 73 years ago, this Talkus. So the 4th round, and this year will be Perik Yud Gimel. This year, that's the Perik that we study this year, chapter 13. And there are 2 Mamarim from the Rebbe, 1963 and 1983 was the 2 years in the cycle that we have Mamarim from the Rebbe. This book over here is called Sefer Mamarim Basi Lagani, it's a 2-volume set, and this has this has the Mamarim from the Rebbe from 1971 in the second cycle. The first volume is the Mamarim from 1951 through 1970, and this is 1971 for the second cycle. So this year, as mentioned again, is chapter 13. So what is chapter 13 all about? So in chapter 13 of the Maimer, Perik Yud Gimel, just a little preface beforehand. The Frierdiker Rebbe talks there about the idea of the Bnei Yisrael are called Tzivois Hashem. We are called the army of Hashem. This week's parsha, we're called the army. Why are we called the army? Because we are in the front lines, we are the ones who are busy doing the Milchama, the war. And that leads into a discussion. The Friedrich Rebbe talks about Midas HaNetzach. You know that we have 7 Midas. One of our Midas is Netzach, which is the Midah of being of victory. And who has the strongest Midas HaNetzach? The strongest Midas HaNetzach is to be found by a king. A king will do anything for victory. When a king's at battle, the king will, today we see out in the world, we see what people do for victory. Stupid, silly, right, the things and to the extent and what they're willing to sacrifice. And the way the Friedrich Rebbe puts in the Maimer is that a king is mevaziv is all his eisrus for the purpose of attaining victory. In other words, he's willing to give out everything that he has. All the money and the treasures that he had from generations that his ancestors had collected. When it comes to winning the war, the king gives up everything. And he gives up everything, but to who do those treasures go to? To the soldiers. In other words, everything is there to give the resources to the soldiers. All his eisrus are there to the foot soldiers to do the job. We are the foot soldiers of Hashem. We are tzivus Hashem. Which means, and we are the ones who are doing the job of doing the battle in this world to make this world into a dir b'tachtonim. So for us, Hashem gives us all the eitzers to do the job. What is the eitzer of Hashem? What is the treasure of Hashem? So the Maimer explains that the treasure of Hashem is the Eir Ein Sof. We have the power of the Eir Ein Sof, which is what gives us the power to win the battle. And in explaining what the Eir Ein Sof is, the Friedrich Rebbe brings down what is brought down in Kabbalah, that the Eir Ein Sof is Lamaila Maila Adin Kates, Ulamata Mata Adin Tachlis. It's high to the highest level and low to the lowest level. What does that mean? What does that mean that the Eir Ein Sof? So Maila indicates has its own large explanation. In the Perek of this year, the Friedrich Rebbe explains what does it mean that Eir Ein Sof is Lamata Mata Adin Tachlis. It comes down to the infinitely lowest levels possible. So I want to read you a little from what he writes over here. He says, I'm not going to read you the Hebrew because I'll just translate straight. That which it says, the Mata Adin Tachlis, this goes on the revelation and the manifestation that it's Bechinas Hispashtos. It spreads out. Bechinas Ein Sof ve'Ein Shir bli gvul mamish. There's no end, there's no limit, infinite. Ad Lamata Mata to the lowest level. That the Eir Ein Sof comes down even to the lowest levels. And that's what it means that the Eir Ein Sof is Lamata Adin Tachlis. That the light of the Eir Ein Sof is infinite and comes down even to the lowest level. And then he says, in what's called Eilam Ein Sof, in the infinite worlds, which is before the Tzimtzum, and even in the world of Atzilus. So it's not a Chiddush, it's not a Pella, it's not a wonder that the Eir Ein Sof is over there. Because after all, it's a Keli, we're talking about godly worlds. It's Atzilus, the world, the infinite worlds. But in the worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, the worlds of our worlds, now here is the fact that the Eir Ein Sof is present over here, that's already a Chiddush. But it is. Then he continues, I'm not giving you word for word. And then he says, but then, even in the worlds of Biyah, in the worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, so you have Neshamas, and you have Malachim, and you have Olamas. The Neshamas are the Pnimius of every world. The Neshamas are the highest thing in every world. The Malachim are the Chitzonius of the world. The angels are the Chitzonius, because relative to the real Kavanah, which is Neshamas, Malachim are Chitzonius. And the worlds themselves are Chitzonius of the Chitzonius. And the Eir Ein Sof is in the Olamis. Not only is the Eir Ein Sof in the Neshamas, it's also in the Malachim, it's even in the Olamis. And then after many Yishnalshalos, the light of the Eir Ein Sof, it gets hidden and more hidden until it reaches our world. And in our world, suddenly the Eir Ein Sof enters the Galgalim and the Mazalas. It enters the different forces of nature. And therefore everything that enters our world and our physical world is all through these different forces. As the Pasuk says, Memeged Tvoy Shamash, Memeged Geresh Yirachim. And this is a tremendous hashpala, tremendous degradation that the Lukus comes in, the godliness, the Ein Sof comes into this world and enters into the Klippas, until it comes into our physical world, until it enters into a space which can be the exact opposite of a Lukus. The Ein Sof enters a space which forgets on Hashem. As the Pasuk says, regarding Klippa and Sitrachra, it's actually about Pare. But what does Pare say? Li Yo'er Vani Asisini. Pare says, the Nile, the Nilus, belongs to me, and I created myself, which is obviously the Hepech HaEmes, the opposite of truth, because the truth is that Ve'yevarach Yaakov is Pare. The Yaakov bench Pare, and it's brought down in the Tanchuma, and Rashi brings it down also. That how did Yaakov bench Pare? He benched him that the Nilus should come up towards him, which is the tremendous hashpah from Hashem. But Pare, who's Melech HaMitzarim Ugvulim, the Friedrich Rabbi writes, he is the king of limitations. Mitzrayim means also, he's the king of limitations. He's a kafui toiva. In other words, he denies that toiva and says instead, Li Yo'er Vani Asisini, it's all me, it's all about me, which is the Hepech HaEmes. And that is the Ein Sof. It comes down, and even this ultimately, where is it receiving its energy from the Ein Sof?
But Rabbi, something I can understand is, I thought that Yaakov blessed Paro and said that you're going to get bracha from the Nile River, from the Nilus. So it actually came, the bracha from the Nile, from the Nilus, actually came from Yaakov Avinu, no?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
what I'm saying.
how can you say it came from him?
That's exactly the point.
He was power.
Because it's the lowest klippa possible. And the Ein Sof is there also. That's
Wow.
which is really a reflection of what we're talking about over here in our Pedek, how the Ein Sof is in everything, right? Now, it's easy for us to sit and laugh at Pare and laugh at Mitzrayim, right? Oh, lowliness. But obviously, as Chassidim, we know that everything that we learn about, we're learning about ourselves. So we're going to have to find out what is the Pare and what is the Mitzrayim within ourselves. So the Pedek Rabbi continues.
But the truth, Rabbi, is that I find I have got Paro in me.
That's what we're talking about.
I have to unlock Paro, and I have to get him out.
So what is that? So what is that Pare? That's what he's going to say right now.
Today's I don't know.
He says, right, he says, here it says it's somewhat different words. He says that this can be found both and by business people and by people who learn Torah. Because by business people, by someone who thinks that a business person who thinks that it's their own,
I did it.
yeah. Even though he knows and he believes that the Eibishter is the one who gives koyach lasis choyel, who gives you the power, and birchas Hashem hitasher, that ultimately all wealth comes from Hashem. And this is a person who mentions Shem Shemayim always, all the time you're saying, oh, Baruch Hashem, Yirtz Hashem, Be'ez Hashem. Nevertheless, he thinks that it's himself. He thinks that, even though he believes and he knows and he says Yirtz Hashem, but when you cut down to the chase of it, he believes that it's his own koyach. He believes that it's his own chachma. He's a smart guy. It's my business acumen that got this for me. And that's why, in a time when the business is going well, so Yo'is b'havosei. It's also a pasuk in Tehillim. What does b'havosei mean? Yo'is means he has chutzpah. B'havosei, in pasuk pshat means with his evil, right? It's talking about. But the Friedrich Rebbe says, "Hu misgoa be'etzem muhusei." B'havosei can also mean with his existence. I am proud of my existence. And you're so proud. Take a look. That business deal I did. I'm so smart. I'm so wise. And if business isn't going well, then it's a ganz not upgefallen. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm an awful businessman. And both aren't true. not the high when you're doing good, and not the low when you're not doing good. It's not, why? Because birchas Hashem yitasher, right? So therefore, you have to feel the same. You have to know that you have to do your work, and whatever happens is from the Eibishter. And the same thing is and if you don't feel that way, then you're like Pare. Obviously, in a very subtle way. Pari wasn't saying Yirtz Hashem, Baruch Hashem. But when we're realizing the klippa, we have to realize the klippa also, it's avodah within us. And the same thing is also when it comes to Yeshua, people who are learning Torah, that even though a person learns Torah and knows that it's Hashem's Torah, nevertheless, it's possible that Chalila, that even though he's learning Torah, he says something, a dvar halacha, which is opposite of Torah. Which is very similar to the business people, that even though he believes in Hashem 100%, right? Nevertheless, he gets all proud of himself when his business is doing well, and when when business isn't doing well, he gets all anxious. And the reason why is because, just by the businessman, the reason why is because the whole foundation is not proper. Because the whole idea that he knows that Hashem is the one who gives him the wealth it's only Amunah Pshuta, but it's not something which has really permeated. And therefore, the result is, as mentioned earlier, and the same thing as people learn, that even though a person learns Torah, knows it's Hashem's Torah, but the actual learning isn't proper, and that's because when he learns Torah, he forgets about the one who gave Torah. Rather, he approaches Torah as an intellectual pursuit. And since it's intellect, it's seichel, so afterwards, when he knows what he learned, even though he knows in the back of his mind it's Hashem's Torah, it's intellect, and therefore he can say something and be medayik something which is the opposite of Torah. Which means, in general, it's a person who's receiving its energy from a lakus, and nevertheless, he can be the opposite of the Eibishter. That's the point there. And why is that? Because the Eir itself comes down in so many tzimtzumim, so many contractions, and so many concealments. This idea of teva, that the word teva is related to the word tubu b'yamsuf, nature. It's sunk, it's sunk to the point that it can't be seen. The Eir of Hashem is sunk and hidden very much until it comes down into the lowest levels possible. And this is once again, really echoing what we're learning about in this simon in the Iggeres HaKodesh, where we learned the idea of realizing the Eir Sof is everywhere. Even at the lowest level, the Eir Sof is there also, and therefore in everything there is a kavanah, and we have to look around the world realizing that there's a purpose, and everything in the purpose is to get me to serve Hashem in a better and superior way.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.